Hello and welcome to Learning Rewired, the podcast that explores the future of work, leadership, and learning in a rapidly changing world. I'm Tiago Kivi, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Patrice Gordon here at the Financial Times. Patrice is a global expert in leadership and reverse mentoring. Patrice Gordon has worked with some of the world's biggest organizations, helping them harness the power of reverse mentoring to drive inclusive leadership, innovation, and cultural transformation. Her TED Talk on reverse mentoring has reached millions of people, and her insights have shaped leadership strategies across the world. In this episode, we'll explore the impact of reverse mentoring, why it's such a powerful leadership tool, and how organizations can implement effectively. Whether you're an HR leader, a learning professional, or a business executive, these conversations will provide you valuable takeaways on how to unlock new perspectives and strengthen your leadership culture. Patrice, thank you for being here in this cold Friday afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Learning Rewired. And if you want to start, just to understand a little bit more about yourself, how did you get to where you are today?
Okay. I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. I am actually a chartered accountant. I started my career within PwC, so I thought I would be an accountant for my whole life. I did my degree in psychology and accounting. I love structure and numbers, obviously, but I also really love people. And so I worked at PwC. I moved to British Airways. I was a finance director at Royal Mail. And I really then took a step back to thought, what is the impact that I want to make on my organisation and the people that I work with? And that's when I reinvested in a coaching qualification, because I thought actually being in a position to ask better questions makes you a better leader. And with that coaching qualification, that's when I set up M&A. And then I went to work for Virgin Atlantic as head of commercial finance. And when I got to Virgin Atlantic, that's when I got really brave. In regards to stepping out of my arena of finance. I moved into the commercial team, and I also started to really invest a lot of time in additional extracurricular activities, shall we say, which included a lot of the inclusion activity around the business. And so from that perspective, I was known as the person that kind of gets things fixed, but also very interested in driving inclusion and belonging within the organisation. And not from I think this is a great idea, but from a perspective of I think this is a great idea and I'd love to be involved in shaping the solution. And that's how I won a few awards. And that's ultimately what led me to be a reverse mentor for our then CEO, Craig Krieger, which then led to another experience of leading the cohort of mentors within the first inaugural program at Virgin Atlantic, which then led to a few more awards, which then led to Richard Branson recognising my work, which was incredible. And that then led to a TED Talk, which you just aforementioned, which then led to the offer to write a book focused on reverse mentoring in the middle of the pandemic, where, as you know, there was a lot going on and lots of leaders were really struggling to figure out how to connect with the different people within their organisation. I wrote the book in the pandemic. I really doubled down on my consultancy whilst working full-time too. So I was working 7 days a week for about 2 years. And then I got to a point where there was significant demand and I had to make a decision as to, do I try to do both, and I was still performing really well, but actually was I doing the thing that I was meant to be doing? And I got a calling. The book was about to be released and I thought, I'm going to take a bet and bet on myself. And that's why I picked finance, because it's very safe. So I could always go back. And that was just over 2 years ago. So I stepped out now around the consultancy, as you said, helping organizations implement reverse mentoring programs focused on inclusive leadership. I think my sweet spot is because I've sat around senior leadership team tables as like head of commercial finance or commercial strategy director for over 10 years. I have that leadership perspective, like that's quite live and quite recent, alongside my coaching skills, alongside this deep interest and research that I've done around reverse mentoring. So very short story. That's how I come before you today.
Of course, having a mentor is something that's very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Having someone that you can trust, guide you, to show you the way, to show you the ropes in a way. And why is reverse mentoring so powerful. And why is it different from normal or the standard traditional mentoring that we know?
So my definition of reverse mentoring is where you have a senior leader who's mentored by someone who is not represented around the senior leadership team table. So underrepresented around the leadership team table. So that means if you have a team full of women, it means that you have some men who are your mentors. Or if you have a workforce that's incredibly young and the leadership team is young, you have some people who are a little bit older that are your mentors. It's really around shifting perspectives and not making sure that you have like an echo chamber around you. So normally we find a mentor who we really aspire to be like, that we're like, actually, you've cut through this organization really well, or we've seen your career and we want to emulate you. And we look at it from a hierarchical perspective. But with reverse mentoring, with everything that's happening and changing in the world, it's about tapping into the skills that you maybe not have. So it could be from a digital perspective, it could be from an age perspective, as we've touched on, and we know the workforce at the moment is very intergenerational. So really understanding some of those different needs of the different generations. It might be from a gender perspective. It might be from a disability perspective. So it's different because we are not looking up the hierarchy for answers. We're actually looking more broadly to really understand how do we best serve the people that we lead, but also the customers that we might potentially have, because you're really missing out if you're constantly just looking upwards.
So it's less of the idea is more focused on opening your horizons.
Absolutely.
Broadening your mindset.
Yes.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you share any real example of, without
Yes.
citing names?
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's a really famous one that I am trying to secure an interview with, so maybe this might help me. So Estee Lauder, as you would have seen in the news, they're going through a bit of a restructure at the moment. But Estee Lauder is one of the most famous examples of an excellent reverse mentoring program. So Fabrizio has been running the program, I think, now into its 10th year. And he is very, very supportive and keen on ensuring his senior executives are partnered with individuals from Gen Z to help to ensure that the brand doesn't fall behind. So if you think about the customers for like a beauty brand, for example, the trends change very quickly and the customer base is ever demanding and there's lots of competition. So that program is one of the most famous ones. Those senior leaders, all the S's, all the SVPs are partnered up with people who are from a Gen Z population, and they basically are able to cut through the hierarchy to share their viewpoints and ideas of how things could be done differently. It means that innovation is quicker. It means that, if you've worked in a large organization, you realize sometimes change is a bit slow.
Yeah.
So proposals have to be made, business cases have to be made. It needs to go through certain levels before something gets approved. This reverse mentoring program and others alike who are open to kind of breaking down those hierarchical levels, you're able just to cut through and say, actually, I know we need to do a business case, but I see this, I lived this is my lived experience. These are the trends that are happening right now. We can wait and do a business case and we can do that maybe post, but actually we're going to miss out on this trend right now if we don't act on it, or if we don't make this tweak, or this is currently going viral, or this is the, let's say, word on the street. This is what's actually happening in real life. And I think as organizations have to move very quickly, it's a really good way of being able to kind of tap into the resources. You have like thousands of employees. So why not use your employees as kind of pseudo customer base? And actually overall, this is where I think organizations miss out, right? Because technically you do want your employees to be your customers as well, on the most part, right? When it's a consumer good.
Absolutely. So if I'm a CEO or if I'm a senior vice president of an organization, what can I gain from reverse mentoring?
Tapping back into that previous question, if you are not learning from people who are different to you, if you are doing the same things that you've done before and you are not opening your eyes to a different landscape to learning, you are actually falling behind. So if you are tapped in and you want to be at the forefront of what's happening, you do need to seek alternative forms of learning, and reverse mentoring is one of those tools. So, you could do a course at a business school, you could do a Headspring course actually, but by the time you finish that Headspring course, things have changed so significantly. So how do you tap into what's happening right now, what is live? How, one, and then two, a big thing right now is employee engagement, and it always has been, but employees are louder now, and so they need to be actively engaged. We, seen the Gallup reports around active disengagement, around people who are actively, disinterested, those quiet quitting individuals. we really need our employees to be committed, and we need them to be engaged. When they're committed and engaged, they have higher levels of productivity. They have higher feeling of belonging within their colleagues, and actually it's just a nicer place to work. So for your own personal learning, I think reverse mentoring is incredibly important. But also if you're trying to lead a team where you want people to feel like they belong and they actually want to contribute towards an environment, you understanding how people are feeling and how you are perceived perhaps, or how leadership is perceived, and how you can do what you do a little bit differently to encourage people to kind of stay with you and be sticky, is one of the key reasons.
And just going back to one of these points that you mentioned, to me now is very clear what a senior leader can get from this. But how about the mentor, the reverse mentor, that perhaps the younger person, the more junior employee, let's say, what do they gain from actually, and what kind of feedback do they give at the end of a program like this?
Okay, so one, what do they gain? They gain access to hierarchy and power, which sometimes is very interesting to see, because I think some individuals and some organizations, there's a really big divide. So you would never be in a position where you could have a meeting with someone from a C-suite, for example. So that access to power and thinking, actually, could that be someone that I could emulate and be part of? Like, I'm actually closer to power from that perspective. The big thing that we see in engagement surveys is around, do we feel like leaders understand? Do we feel like leaders listen? And so it's a great opportunity for people to interact with senior leaders and see like their authenticity, that they actually do care and they're actually able to tap in and create a relationship with someone so senior. Because sometimes there is an ivory tower and there is a pedestal, and people feel like that kind of active engagement is difficult to do. So it really breaks down those barriers. I just finished a report for one of my clients yesterday, and we had 18 different mentors on this program, and we did mentoring circles. So it wasn't one-on-one, it was kind of 4-to-1. So do you want me to explain that?
Yeah, yes, please. Yeah.
So this is an environment where it's a quite small environment. And so I didn't want to put one-on-one mentor to mentor, because I thought that it would be a bit intense, and we decided it would be too intense, and maybe the psychological safety wouldn't be there with like a one-on-one relationship. And so to involve more mentors within the business as well, we said, actually, we'll have one mentee, so one senior leader, matched with 3 to 4 mentors. So we're really trying to drive cultural change and cultural shift within this organization. So we brought those groups together from different departments as well. So it was double whammy, because we were able to break down some of those silos amongst them, but also they were able to feedback collectively to the senior leader in terms of some of the challenges that they had. And it was great because they were able to solve some things between themselves as well. So a lot of the feedback from those surveys was really around, it was great to be able to have this one-on-one relationship, to know that I don't have to go through my manager and I have direct access to power. So, people talk about not wanting power, but actually they do want access to it. Right. They do want to be able to touch it, feel it, and feel like, actually, no, I can just go and speak to the CEO. It's fine. Like he's my mentee now. They've talked about the reduction in silos. So even for those who are not in the mentoring circles, people reach out to people who are being the mentor, and they're like, actually, can you share my viewpoint on this? Like, people who are not a part of the program, when they understand the program and they know the mentors who are on the program, they kind of see it as a gateway to power as well. So those individuals will like, everyone wants to have a coffee with me and like share their viewpoints and opinions, because they want to have access closer to that power. But talking about power, those mentors feel empowered as a result of the program. So they realize that their voice, they are seen, they are heard, but they also feel comfortable that after the program's finished, they can still raise things with that individual, but also in their own role, they feel more empowered to drive change. And that's the beautiful, that like seeing the mentors as we're starting versus seeing like how empowered they feel when we finish is one of the best parts of my job.
And what is the most common feedback from senior leaders, when they end a program like this?
One, they forgot what it was like to, when I'm talking specifically around like the hierarchy, I do a lot around hierarchy and intergenerational. So they talk about, they forgot what it was like when they first started out and how different the workplace aspect is right now. So, especially these ones most recently, a big chunk of time has been outside of the office. So like 2 to 3 years, there hasn't been kind of a consistent office atmosphere. And I think, I don't know about you, when you first Like we went straight into the office, PwC was straight into the office 5 days a week. There was no homework in, like everyone was in the office and we just had to figure it out. And I think they underestimated the impact of that, especially on people who were very early on in their careers as well. They also realized how something really simple or simple solutions can be really overcomplicated with different levels of management. That's a really common piece of feedback. And so the encouragement of not necessarily always defaulting to like senior leadership decisions for certain things, but actually defaulting to like, let's ask the business, let's ask the teams, but also now being able to tap into this cohort of reverse mentors who are probably a little bit more in the know than other people within the business, but you can trust them that they understand a little bit more of the bigger picture. The number one challenge that is always coming from these groups is that they don't feel the communication is a problem and a challenge. Every single program, communication. And it comes down to employees not necessarily feeling like communication is clear and necessarily like transparent and frequent enough. Leaders feeling like they are always communicating and they're very clear and transparent, and there's always a gap in between. And that is, you know, we talk about that throughout the program, and it's like the expectations versus what actually happened, but also the intention versus what has actually been received by the people and team. And so having this cohort and being able to test in with this group of mentors that you already have, like, this is what we're thinking of doing. We're going to return to office 4 days a week. This is the decision that we're going to make. Let's run it through the group of mentors and see like what feedback they have in terms of how we can ensure this message lands in the most productive way as possible, and what things do we need to think about beforehand. And so things like that, like even the Q&A, you know, when you do mass organisation comms, you'll have the communication, you have FAQs. Just having this group where they're able to tap into it from like a really real perspective, not a PR perspective, like a real perspective, they found so invaluable.
Yeah. And does that often lead into projects to implement the changes that are necessary as well?
Sometimes it's, okay, now we're going to feed this feedback into one of the employee resource groups, for example, or we're going to have the importance of employee engagement and internal communication. So some organizations have like external communication, and some organizations who really are invested in their internal comms, they will have a very strong internal comms team. But you'll usually find in a restructure, it's those comms teams that get restructured quite often. But actually the point of holding those and making sure that everyone is clear, is everyone on the bus? How do we make sure everyone's on the bus? We need to make sure that the communication is super clear so they are not feeling kind of threatened by organization, and they're really feeding into making sure this organization is a success. So I'd say, number one, it can lead to formation or formalization of existing structures that already exist within the business to ensure like slick communication. And I think in terms of what happens after that, employees feel more empowered. So within their teams, they are speaking up more, and they're feeling like, actually, this is the them and us is slightly reduced. So, you know, like actually they need to make this decision, but actually the empowerment of actually maybe I can be part of the solution to that. So for those organizations who take it seriously and have that communication thread embedded, I definitely see like a really nice, like long lasting change for that.
Mm-hmm. And if you are a human capital leader, an HR person who's interested in reverse mentoring, how do you even start preparing and identifying the people who could potentially be the mentors and giving them the confidence to go into a senior leader, for example, and mentor them? You know, how do you prepare them?
So I would say there's a process. So after reviewing like hundreds of these programs, I realized that kind of that one-on-one maybe not be as like I was good in my one-on-one relationship because I had done lots of inclusion activity before and I was very comfortable in my skin. So I wasn't I was a senior leader already, and it was to the CEO, and I had coached by someone in HR, so that was a one-on-one relationship. What I found the most effective is when there's cohorts of individuals. So you're really clear about what the objective of the program is. So we've looked at our engagement survey. We realized that there's a gap between how leaders perceived and how they perceive themselves, for example. And so you need to be really clear with the organization to say, we're starting this program, we're going to start a pilot, and we want 10 volunteers to be mentors. And there's an application process to ensure, I recommend that there's that application process to ensure that people are applying for it for the right reasons. And the right reasons are to help to enhance kind of the leadership capability of the organisation so they can understand different levels of hierarchy and perhaps some of the challenges that are being faced with a different alternative lens. So once the applications are made and the intentions of those individuals are checked to make sure that they know that it's for like a wider purpose, not just to kind of showboat to have access just purely to power. Obviously, that's a byproduct of it, but that shouldn't be the main reason. We then within my programs, we take individuals through a training session. So we take them through as a cohort. And this is why I think it's really important, because you're really developing future leaders. You're helping them to come together to air their viewpoints and share their viewpoints in a really constructive way, so that they can feel they've got skin in the game in making a difference within the organisation, but also recognising some of those conversations might be a bit sensitive as well. So I would say from a HR leader perspective, it's making sure that there's almost a cohort so it doesn't feel like they're going in alone, but they have a group of individuals that they can test. We can share scenarios, we could do some role play just in case they get some sticky situations. I think we underestimate sometimes people's ability to be able to self-solve, right? So we always feel like as a leader, we've got to come in with the answer. But actually, people are very intelligent. That's why we hire them. Actually putting them in a room together and giving them some guidance and getting them to share their experiences is oftentimes much more powerful than sometimes like someone like me coming in and saying like, this is what I did in this scenario and this is the answer. Actually, them sharing their own examples and sharing amongst them builds that cohort mentality. And it also means that when HR is not around, or if I'm not around, they can self-soothe and figure out the challenges within themselves as well. So they feel even more empowered from that perspective.
And how long does a typical reverse mentoring program actually last?
I recommend 6 months because I think, and one session a month, so over 6 months. I think I also use the Timothy Clark methodology of psychological safety. So the foundation for me of a really strong reverse mentoring program is focused on having really good psychological safety. So the Timothy Clark model of psychological safety goes from actually you're being invited, so you're included, we're sat around the table, great, you're part of the program. Then it is actually you're able to come into the program and you're able to kind of ask questions. So actually, yeah, we're in a really good place here. Then it is you feel as though you can contribute. So what I'm sharing with you, what you're sharing with me, we have equal respect here. And that means we've got to a stage where I really value your contributions. The best and the final stage is challenge. So it is you're in a position where I feel like I can challenge you. You feel like you can challenge me because we've built up enough social capital between us to know that we're being challenged on the thing, not each other. And so from that perspective, I think that a program of 6 months is better than 3 months because you're not forcing to get to those different stages. You're kind of spending the time to get to know each other. Then you are talking about some like important or topical business challenges that you might have. And then you're moving into a space where either party feels comfortable in bringing something a bit more contentious up. Because when we get to that last challenger stage, that's where real innovation happens. And I always like to say for my team members as well, I'd rather you throw bricks inside the house. I'd rather we have it out inside the house. I'd rather you feel comfortable enough for us to have this conversation and face some challenges that maybe my competitors might be thinking about than actually for the competitors to have a kind of foot in through the door, because it's through that perspective where your employees and people feel safe enough to challenge internally, where you're going to stay ahead of the game and you're going to be in a position where you can have that foresight to be able to tap into some problems and challenges that you might not be able to if people will feel, a bit scared to raise things with you because they don't, they might not even have the solution. A lot of managers, I saw today one of the things, when you first start, I don't know if you heard this, but when you first start out in your career, my leaders always, and I actually said it myself, like, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. Yes, right? So, that's wonderful, but world complicated. And I think one of the things that I think when you're coming up, you want to come to the leader with like a solution. But actually in the space that we are in right now, especially in the world, there is a challenge and I will have a viewpoint. I won't have a solution on it, but does that mean I shouldn't feel comfortable in talking to you about it? And so I think that's where like the real meaty, insightful conversations come when you've I'm going off tangent, but when you've had an opportunity to develop a real relationship with someone and it's not, okay, tick the box, I've done it in 3 months, now can I move on to the next thing? because when we think about how we form relationships and how we get things done in a workplace, it's not based on a time.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not, okay, I've got this project, I need to get to know this person in 3 months, I'm going to get an outcome. It is, we've interacted a few times, we've had a couple of projects together, we know, like, and trust each other, and then we can go to deeper levels of that relationship.
Yeah.
With reverse mentoring, you're not necessarily privy to that constant interaction so frequently. So actually having a longer amount of time, which is slightly formulaic, like it can be a little bit awkward. But then when people really put effort in on both sides, then it can turn into something that's actually going to be very fruitful.
And over this period of 6 months, the conversations that they have are usually guided by overarching framework, or how do they?
So it depends on what the challenge is within the organisation and how comfortable the leaders feel. So the team will raise, like, what the problems or challenges are from the engagement survey, for example. Both parties will have objectives going into the relationship, and then we'll have themes in terms of what the program themes are. So we'll start off with the kickoff session with both the mentors and the mentees. And sorry, I mentioned that the mentors have a training session collectively. The mentees also have a training session collectively. The mentee session is often, they're like, why do we need to have a session? We need to have a session to just make sure we're understanding the role reversal that is about to happen.
Yeah.
And so really just taking through, like, some of those examples where people might feel a bit uncomfortable, and ensuring that they recognize that they're responsible for setting up the psychological safety within that relationship. Then some leaders are fine. They're like, okay, give me the guidance, but I'll just do my own thing. Some leaders are a little bit more trepidatious. So they're like, actually, can you please give me some more guidance? And so throughout the program, we have people that are around that will have the overall themes, and we give them some guided questions on those. We bring everybody together for 6 months, every 2 sessions. We bring everybody together as a mentor group and a mentee group to see what common themes are arising, and see whether there's any course correction that needs to happen, but also see if there's, like, some really poignant themes that are arising that we can pull out from the program ahead of waiting for the end. So we don't wait just to, like, 6 months, like, what's the outcome? It's like, what's the change that we can use to influence right now? And then if there's something like, oh, actually, we think this keeps on coming up, and we think that we need to tap into that a little bit more, we maybe take it out and give it to an employee resource group, for example, and say, actually, these are the questions that we've got coming up. Can we tap into this in a deeper level? And can we look at it in that way?
And is it common to come across resistance from the senior leaders into entering a program like this?
So usually by the time I come in, no. And I think I started off by wanting to convince the world that this is the solution. I don't think, controversially, I don't think reverse mentoring is a solution for all organisations. I think there are some organisations where we shouldn't do it because it's not psychologically safe, because there's some bigger problems at hand or bigger challenges that are at hand that reverse mentoring won't fix. It's just the wrong stage, or that they're in a really good place and actually maybe a mentoring circle might be better than a one-on-one. So there's different ways that you would introduce it. I would say that we're always going to have people who are at different ends of the spectrum when it comes to propensity to want to dabble into different interventions. And I like to stick with people who are advocates and those who are on the fence. So those fence sitters who are like, okay, let's see how this works. Like, I want to be a better leader. Yes, I'm not sure how this whole reverse mentoring is going to work, but I'm here for it and I'm willing to participate into it. For those individuals who are kind of detractors, if we're looking at the NPS kind of mentality, I strongly discourage them to apply to be part of the program, simply because that needs a bigger, wider conversation. And also, if we're pairing up someone who's disengaged and a detractor with someone who is underrepresented and given up their time to want to contribute towards the organisation, and then you have someone who's a detractor, that's not a very positive experience for that individual. But also we know that bad news travels quicker than good news. And so therefore that experience will probably tar the whole program, even though it could be like 1 out of 20, that experience. But we don't want to expose people who have less power to someone who's got more power and who's not interested in the program, because that's not very fair on the person with little power.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we're looking now at, globally, there's a lot happening, in terms of leadership, in terms of geopolitics. And of course, reverse mentoring brings allow leaders to open their minds to a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he can also contribute to a more inclusive and diverse type of leadership as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think once you, in general, right, once you see and spend time with someone who's a bit different, you can't unsee it. So you can't just erase the memory. So for you, if you haven't encountered being part or be privy to someone that you wouldn't normally in your day-to-day circle. So Craig Krieger, I would, just to be clear, he asked me to be his mentor because he didn't have any black women in his work circle or his inner circle, right? So it wasn't tokenism because I volunteered on all the committees. So I didn't feel as though it was tokenism. But from his perspective, he didn't have that opportunity, right? It didn't have that opportunity. So once he interacted with me, we developed a relationship, then he obviously felt more comfortable with me. So what a miss you're having if you're not open to having experience, or you haven't had the privilege of having experience with someone of difference. And I think we forget where people have been in organisations for a really long time and where the world has changed so significantly. Like schools and universities might have been very different like 20, 30, 40 years ago. Now, in London especially, right, we're very, very diverse here. But across the world, everything is a lot more diverse. So if you haven't had the privilege of growing up with that diversity through your education, say where you live is not necessarily that diverse, your organisation might be the place where you get your diversity. But as a senior leader, would you feel comfortable in going to find someone who's diverse and be like, can we have a coffee? Because it's a bit awkward, isn't it? So to have a program where you're able to kind of tap into, actually, I don't have any knowledge about this, and I'm really open to like learning from someone who's got a different background, whatever that is. I think, or if you're a person who doesn't have teenagers or is not privy to people from different generations, actually, how interesting would that be to have someone from that perspective who can teach you about social media or about what's happening online, as they are like a digital native, and you're still trying to figure out how to use my iPhone sometimes, right? So it just gives you an alternative perspective in a really safe space. So I would definitely say that you are going to gain so much more, not just from a work perspective, but in life perspective, to be able to just be maybe a little bit more risk-taking in terms of like how you develop and seek relationships going forward.
What did you learn from being a reverse mentor?
I learned how vulnerable like leaders feel about not knowing all the answers, and I took it for granted. Exactly what I just explained to you in terms of where you go to school, where you grew up, like where you live, and having that diversity really naturally. Growing up in South London, like I had it, I've got all kinds of diversity, but like you take it for granted that people live with that level of diversity around them as well, and they don't. I also learned, I had proximity to power, but from a personal perspective, it was the first time, it sounds really silly now, but it was the truth. Like, it's the first time I was welcomed into a room as my whole self, as like Patrice Gordon, black female, who is also like really good at her job, which is why you should be invited into a room, because you're really good at your job. But it was the first time it was led with that, like, as in, I'm really interested in the experience as a black female. No one's ever asked me that question before. Like, I've never felt the privilege of, what has it been like, and how can we make it a more inclusive place for you? Because I've always felt the need, prior to that, to just fit in, like culture ad versus like culture fit versus culture ad. Like, I joined that organization, so I need to fit with it. And that was the first time where I felt like welcome. Like, actually, no, you're really adding something here. How can we get more of that? How can we get more of that, Patrice? I felt really welcomed. And I think that's another part of the feedback from the mentors, where they just feel seen.
Yeah.
They feel seen and they feel listened to, because oftentimes within very large organizations, you feel like you're just like another cog in the wheel, as opposed to being seen. And so it was so valuable for me that I went off, wrote a book and quit my job. But yeah.
If you could give one piece of advice to HR leaders when they're considering establishing a program like this, what would be the one thing that they need to have in mind?
I would ask them to ask people. So oftentimes within organizations, us leaders, we think we've got all the answers. We think we know what the problems are. But sometimes when you ask the actual people, the problem is different to what you think it is. So I would say, actually, this is the reason. This is a reverse mentoring program. We're really interested in starting it. This is what we are thinking about focusing it on. What do you think? So I would do like an internal poll, or like ask if you've got any employee resource groups, tap up your employee resource groups and ask them the question of, this is what we think this is what our intention is. What do you think? Because what you're trying to solve for, it might be a different question that you need to ask. And you've already got employee resource groups which are there because they want to create a better environment for everybody within the organization to work in. So use those groups. I think sometimes as leaders, we're like, okay, we've seen the answers, we've got some verbatim, we've got a solution for it, let's implement the solution. Forgetting along the way, we need to just keep that constant engagement and make sure we're asking the right question. As with coaching, right, we keep on asking different questions to make sure that the coachee is really getting to the root of what their challenge is. So I'd say keep on asking the questions and make sure that you've got people engaged, because they're going to be the people who are going to be your internal ambassadors as well for the program. So you want to make sure they're engaged, and everyone's like, no, we're doing this program because of X, Y, and Z. Not, they're doing this program. Not really sure why they're asking that question, because that's not the question they should be asking. And I've seen that a few times. So it's really important to tap into that.
That makes sense. And then what next? After a successful program like this, what should organizations be looking at?
So two things. One, if it's successful in one part of the business, then what other part of the business can they implement it in? So definitely not a big bang. I always start off with, actually, let's do a pilot. Let's see how it works. Let's make sure for the organization it works, and take the learnings and then roll them out. So if it's been successful in one part, or even if it's been unsuccessful in one part, is it applicable to another part of the business? Like, take our lessons and move on.
And sorry to interrupt, what would be the ideal size for a pilot, for example?
I'd say 20. So so 10 mentors, 10 mentees.
Oh, right. Okay.
A small group.
Yeah.
Depending on the size of the organization and how open, like I've done it with 5 and 5. The biggest I've done is 13. Because I'm dealing with C-suite -3. So it's really the senior leaders. And we haven't touched on that, but I would say we need to start with the most senior leaders, because once they're actively engaged and demonstrating they're actively engaged, it sends the right message to the rest of the business. The second thing is, I think it's one of the most impactful interventions, because it is the only one that leaders can't delegate to somebody else. They can't delegate it, and they can't just be like a sponsor for the program. They actually have to give up their time and energy to do it. And that's very, to invest an hour a month on a face-to-face meeting, but not only just that, the prep that goes into that session, but also the reflection time that you need to do after. We're saying, let's say a minimum 2 hours every month for this mentoring relationship. That's a significant, we know how busy leaders are and how time poor they are. So 2 hours is quite a significant chunk of your time, right? So the second part is, how do you then expand it? So you've done the great program, what happens? So what? So what? Now what? As we say in coaching, right?
Yeah.
The ERGs, which I've mentioned several times, it's about how do you take the learnings from these programs into something else. So you might get feedback from, we are in an organization where we feel like we're extremely siloed. Okay, what can we do as a back of that? I'm sure there's an internal project already, but how do we use the fuel from the fire of the reverse mentoring to help support and charge things that are already going ahead? The likelihood is things are already happening within the organization, but they've been deprioritized, and they've been deprioritized because when you sit around a leadership team table, you get the most important things that you need to deal with that day, that month, that quarter. Oftentimes these things are bubbling up and you won't see them until you're behind the curve. This helps you to get a little bit ahead of the curve and decide then, actually, now that I've seen this, now that we've had this conversation, I can't unsee it. It's a priority to you. I understand why it's a priority to you as in the mentor. How big is it a problem across the whole population? So test it, use it as a litmus test to then say, how big is this problem really? Is it just because Patrice has talked about it and she talked to me about it for 6 months? I can't get it out of my head. Is it really real? So let's ask some of the people from the rest of the business how real this is, and then how do we empower people to drive that change themselves? Because we're going through changes are happening literally every day within organizations. There's a lot of responsibility on leaders to manage and drive that change, but we have workforces who are extremely competent, and actually half the time they just want to be empowered to drive things and get things through. So it's that I think that attitude, that almost permission that it gives mentors and people who witness it. So it's not just the 10 people that might be part of the program. It's actually, no, we've seen a change. We actually think the business trusts us a little bit more. Actually, I'm empowered to do this. Let's ask for forgiveness as opposed to permission. Obviously, all the regulations aside, there's some things that aren't really that deep, and sometimes we just make it, a really big deal without thinking actually or feeling like we're empowered. So I definitely think it's empowered from one side, but also leaders recognizing actually, what it might have been like a while, 20 years since I was in that position. And I forget how unempowered I felt then, but actually right now I really need them to take the reins and really try to drive things through.
Very interesting. And if there's one piece of feedback that you received that was quite remarkable in one of these programs, I say, okay, this is worth everything, that all the changes that I've made in my life, that, is there anything that you want to share? Like that you say, okay, this was really, really interesting, or the result, or the impact that caused in the organization, or a feedback from a mentee or a mentor?
Oh gosh, I actually when I came in today, I had some gifts and flowers, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I, when I get involved in these programs, it's not for me. Obviously, it's now my business, but it's really understanding and seeing people, and especially with leaders who are in like really senior positions, obviously, but they like just forget and they use me as a confidant, and I get to then coach them through like some of these really major impacts and environments. But what fills me with joy is when like they obviously have a session. They're like, okay, yeah, I feel like I've really changed, and I really feel like I've like listened, and I feel like I'm a better leader. But what really, really makes me smile is when I leave the organization and I'll get like a LinkedIn message from someone on their team, and who will share with me how much like more they enjoy work or how they've seen a difference. And that happens more times. I get more messages from mentors or people who are part of those teams as opposed to the mentees afterwards, like, 'cause we have like a coaching relationship.
Yeah.
But those are the things that really bring me joy, because I'm around like long lasting change and not performative change. And I remember sitting around like that leadership team table where it's like, great, we've done a project or we've done this piece of training. Now what we're going to do with it? Like, is my behavior really changing? So it's great if I can self-declare that my behavior has changed. But actually what really matters is when people on my team can vouch that it's changed and it's unprompted. It's not part of the survey. It's actually people who are not even part of the program who have messaged me afterwards to say that they've really seen a change. And that brings me pure joy.
Excellent. So what is the best way to connect with you?
Check out my website, www.mnair.co.uk, and just contact me via LinkedIn.
Excellent. And you're also one of our associate educators here at Headspring.
Indeed, I am indeed.
Yeah, working on some interesting programs.
I know, I'm really excited about this year.
Yeah, so, well, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
This afternoon. And it's been a pleasure. Really, really interesting conversation. And thanks for your time. And for everybody listening, thank you for being there. Thank you for downloading this episode. If you want to listen to other episodes, other conversations with our educators, with our experts, go to our website. It's headspringexecutive.com. We are available to discuss any of your learning and development needs. So thank you very much. I've been Tiago Kivi. My guest has been Patrice Gordon. Thank you very much and have a good one.
Thank you.